Welcome to Mushroom Hour. Today on Mushroom Hour, we are graced by the presence of Daniel Sitaram Shankin. Daniel is the founder of Tam Psychedelic Integration, which supports individuals who are exploring their consciousness for spiritual growth and transformational healing. A yoga and meditation teacher for over 20 years, Daniel has dedicated his life to the cultivation of clarity, resilience, and heart. He uses tools from a wide variety of traditions to help his clients to develop powerful personal practices for psychedelic preparation and integration. His upcoming Tam Psilocybin Summit will bring together leaders in the field of psychedelic science from across the world in a virtual summit that is 4 days celebrating the myth, magic, science, and culture of the sacred mushroom. I'm excited to learn more about the emerging psychedelic renaissance and what it means for our futures. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. Sorry, I hope you don't mind if I stepped on your line.
Hi there is always relevant. It's always good.
Okay. It's always welcome.
A good phrase. It's always welcome.
Good.
Yeah, man. Well, I want to dive into the Tam Psilocybin Summit, which here in its second year is kind of emerging as this really luminary event. So many cool people being involved. Such a huge event that you built. But before we get there, I want to know how you got into the work you do in terms of helping folks with psychedelic explorations, and then maybe how you developed a relationship with the mushroom.
Well, as you probably know, it's a story as old as time that you sort of do the work that you need,
Teach what you need to learn. Yeah.
So, if I am helping people to use psychedelics while keeping their mind together, what might that say about me? Right? When in my younger days, in my teenage years, my early 20s, I went a little bit hard and things got a little bit strange. At the same time things were getting strange, they were also getting beautiful. Mm-hmm. So, people who have used these medicines have seen that sometimes they enter spaces that seem more real than ordinary reality. Places where there's lots of love and connection, experiences of oneness, experiences of deeper understanding, deeper wisdom and deeper compassion. And sometimes we want to stay there. Like, that's one of the big things that I end up talking to people about is they had an experience where they felt like they were more themselves. They were more like the people that they wanted to be, and they want to be able to live that reality and that truth. And so that's what I've been trying to do too. I don't know if I'm any good at it yet, but I think I'm better than I was, right? And I like sort of, maybe I think it was a Ram Dass phrase, where he says, we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah.
And so it's really an honor to be able to work with people because that's in essence what we're doing.
Yeah, and when you say to stay in that place of love, stay in that energy of that experience, that psychedelic experience that is so enthralling, is that through methodologies where you're taking things away from that experience rather than having to do psychedelics kind of over and over to stay in that space?
Well, people are going to do the amount of psychedelics that they want to do. It's one thing I've learned. Also, what we've seen is that you can't do that every day.
Right.
There's a microdosing trend where people are taking little bits on regular basis, but for the most part, there's a large portion of your life that you're going to probably have to face sober.
Right.
Who is that person going to be? What is, like, how psychedelically inspired, right? If by psychedelically inspired we mean dedicated to love, connection, wisdom, creative problem solving, advantaging all while harming none, these sorts of things. If that's what we mean, and not just Paisleys or trippy visuals, right? If what we are planning to do is that, then what does that lifestyle look like? What does that decision making look like? What's that value system?
Wow, I think you just eloquently laid out a value system that I think everyone can resonate with, this psychedelically inspired value system. That's really interesting. And that when I think integration, that's the immediate visual that comes to my head, is having this experience and then pulling down all those good things that you got from the experience and imbuing it in your day-to-day life. Because I've spoken with a lot of people who even a one-time experience with psychedelics changes their trajectory, changes their perspectives for the rest of their life. So yeah, we'll talk about integration processes and bringing all the amazing psychedelic insights into your day-to-day life. But I'm really curious where the Sitaram Das came from. That kind of moniker carries a lot of energy with it. So how did you get that name?
Grace, grace and effort, I guess, at some level, probably a lot more grace than effort. I was back in the 90s. There were more books than I knew about, but what got pushed into my hands was Be Here Now.
Right.
And that was sort of the kind of guiding text, that was like, oh, read this, kid, and you'll be okay. And in the back, there was something called the Cookbook for a Sacred Life, and it had mantras and asana and healthy eating and things like that. It was basically a guide to integration. If anybody feels like they need integration support, for $10, you can buy a used copy of Be Here Now and just do the stuff he says in the back, and it'll be all right. So I was fortunate enough, just kind of magically, I have a degree. I have a fairly useless degree in art history, in Eastern art history, which landed me a job as an assistant manager at a yoga bookstore.
Okay, not totally useless then.
I mean, yeah, it was maybe like $9 or $10 an hour and free yoga classes in the 2001. And now the owner was a guy named David Newman Durgadas, who's now sort of a fairly well-known kirtan musician. And so there was a lot of kind of bhakti yoga happening. Like, there was a lot of like this Maharaji lineage, right? So Maharaji is the guru that Ram Dass talks about in Be Here Now. One of the things that I found was there's quite an altered state, similar to a psychedelic state, that I was able to achieve through chanting. I don't necessarily, I've only kind of really started talking about it recently. In my teachings, there's been a lot of kind of just basic mindfulness stuff, which I think is also kind of very important and foundational. But I started getting into chanting and realized, that David was, and the yoga studio in general, sort of had this kind of Maharaji vibe to it. There were pictures of him all over the place, and, his teachings we sort of followed. And there was one of sort of the patriarchs, which is almost a bad word these times, but, one of the sort of elders of the tribe also being a word you can't say quite as much anymore, but this elder named Bhagavan Das was around a lot. And Bhagavan Das was the person who introduced Ram Dass to Maharaji, and he's almost his own controversy that we won't get into.
Okay, because in Be Here Now, he sounds like this benevolent, amazing being that Ram Dass is kind of aspiring to be in some ways, at least in the early part of the book.
Bhagavan Das had a wild ride, and he actually details most of it in a book, and he's been doing a lot of work on himself. It's like, it's very obvious that all of us are imperfect. So, I got a chance to study with him, Bhagavan Das, who was Neem Karoli Baba's first Western devotee. And there were a few times where I guess he felt like the time was right, and there were various kind of members of the community that sort of ended up with names, in sort of kind of casual rituals, kind of casual ritualistic ways, and, sort of given names and sort of shown mantras that maybe we weren't going to get otherwise, and, getting a chance to kind of like, spend like a little time with this guy out in the woods or under a tree, learning new mantras, and, sort of these kind of casual initiations, that weren't inside temples with particular bells or things set on fire or tilaks or robes or anything like that. But, these moments where the energy shifted. And so, I keep it around. I keep it around. And, sometimes I am more like, Das, for those of you who don't know, Das means servant, right? And Sitaram are two manifestations of God, the divine masculine, divine feminine. And I'm quite fond of the balance there. So it's one who kind of serves the divine, serves God, the ultimate, what have you. Sometimes I'm more like that. And sometimes I'm just like a little bit more like that imperfect, neurotic person that we were talking about that unintentionally hurts the people they care about the most.
We've all been there.
Yeah. But, it's nice to have something to hold on to, point your way, or, think about the potential of who you can be.
Yeah, you have kind of a highest aspiration. And what's really interesting to me is folks, who are into the psychedelic space, it seems to go hand in hand with Eastern spirituality or Eastern inspired mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, is that because they've toyed with transcendental states through other vectors, like through transcendental meditation, through yogic practice? They found other ways to reach that same state that psychedelics can put you in. Is that basically, we should establish that. Is that a state of consciousness that's kind of extant, and then you can reach it through psychedelics, you can reach it through, yogic practices, breathing practices? And if it is, does that mean that Eastern mysticism kind of blends naturally with psychedelics because they're both kind of going toward the same place?
Well, kind of short answer, yes. I sort of feel like the mind is the mind.
Okay.
And we have people who, whether they were Hindu mystics, Buddhist mystics, syncretic mystics, and because, I'm just going to limit it to that realm, that part of the geography, right? Because it could get more complicated quick. We had people who were exploring consciousness, right, through practice. And it's also possible, there's a guy named Mike Crowley who's speaking at the summit, who wrote a book called The Secret Drugs of Buddhism, who details the secret drugs of Buddhism. And, if you look on the Hindu side of things, it's like hashish use is not even secret.
Right.
There were mystics who, the sadhus and the agoras who were smoking lots of hashish and probably other mixtures. They talk about the stuff called soma that nobody knows exactly what it is. The point is not necessarily, people get hung up on what it is sometimes, whereas what's more important is what does it do, where does it take you?
Yeah, where are they trying to go? Yeah.
So how do we, somify? And is the external, thing that we eat, the thing that we take or smoke or drink, is that as important as where we want to go and who we want to be? And so, they have mapped out realms of consciousness, and, we probably heard the word samadhi.
Yeah.
If you look at these texts and they have, a dozen different levels of samadhi. And, I asked one of my teachers, I have a teacher who chants the Yoga Sutras every day by heart, from memory. He knows them. And, I've gotten to study the Yoga Sutras with him, and I don't know anybody who knows them better. I've looked. And I once said to him, hey man, I'm looking at this part of the book about all of these levels of samadhi, and I got to tell you, I don't understand what they're saying. And he was like, who does?
It's not like you have to reach a certain spiritual level where suddenly the veil falls and you understand what it means.
Yeah. And it's like, maybe I understand 2 of them and he understands 4. But the thing is we're kind of we're navigating these realms, and, there's variety of principles that helps us to do it with more ease. Kind of this mixture of allowing things to happen, having a certain amount of agency, erring on the side of compassion for ourselves and others, knowing when to be disciplined, knowing when to push, knowing when to be content, and this is, the sort of thing that comes with experience. What do they say? That good judgment comes from experience and experience comes from bad judgment?
A lot of truth in that. Well, it almost sounds like then that some of these practices, while they may be trying to go to the same place as psychedelics can take you, they seem to go together really well. Are those some of the primary tools you use in your work? Because I know you're helping people, have the most, I don't know what better word to use, but the most productive, the safest psychedelic explorations that they can. Are those some of the primary tools in your toolkit, or do you have any other specific tools that you recommend to people or practices you recommend to people?
Well, yes, but it's rooted in that just by virtue of the fact that I'm the one who's working with them, and that's what I'm rooted in.
That's what you're rooted in, right?
But I like to say that I'm not advocating psychedelic use. I'm advocating meditation for people who use psychedelics.
That's a good distinction. That's a good distinction. I even get caught up in it sometimes when I see the beneficial effects and hear the anecdotal stories of how psychedelics have influenced people's life paths for the better, but they're not for everyone. You can't blanket say this substance is good for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, some people are allergic to peanuts, you know, and that's a far less complicated food than Psilocybe cubensis.
Right. How do mushrooms feature in your psychedelic landscape?
It wasn't until I moved to the Pacific Northwest. You know, they were around when I was a kid on the East Coast, but when I moved to the Pacific Northwest for college, I moved to Eugene, Oregon, and the place was lousy with them.
So that was your introduction, was in the bountiful mushroom landscape that is Oregon. I mean, bountiful for both wild forage mushrooms, and I guess we're hearing for psilocybes as well. Specifically, is there a nature of the psychedelic experience? You know, I always throw out the caveat with everyone I talk to about these topics that I'm definitely not the expert. And that's why it's so interesting to me, because I love talking with people who have a lot of experience in this realm. I think it's exciting. I think there's a lot of power here locked in these substances. But the Psilocybe cubensis in general, is there a specific hallmark of these as a psychedelic? Can you tell the difference between this and other psychedelics? And if so, what are some of those defining attributes of the experience with psilocybe?
Oh, geez. You know, am I an expert? What do you think?
Right. I've just put the mantle on you. You can't call yourself an expert, but I'm kind of giving you the mantle.
You know, like, I'm not a scientist. You know, I'm not a biologist or a chemist.
Right.
Or a neuro anything. So I want to throw that. I'm a meditation teacher.
Little disclaimer.
How is it different? You know, I'm trying to, you know, it's obviously not DMT, but there does seem to be intelligences, which is interesting. And sometimes I think I do like that some of this kind of this neural imaging has come up where they show pictures of the neurology of your brain. And as it turns out, your brain on psilocybin is far more interconnected, right? More parts of your brain talk to each other and you have access to more parts of your brain, right? There's that story about how you only use 5%, 10% of your brain. What the science suggests is that when you take psilocybin, you have access to more. And that those parts actually have greater access to each other, which is really interesting. Which means that one of the interesting hallmarks of the experience is that you notice things like mistakes you've made. A lot of people have this kind of chatter in their head, you know, it's like that is sort of new-ish. It doesn't sound like them necessarily. And I think it's because it's parts of their brain that they don't necessarily usually communicate with. It's also entirely possible that they're elves and aliens and fairies.
Or mushroom consciousness. Who knows? Maybe the mushrooms.
The elf of the mushrooms, right? You know, the Mazatecs have kind of these detailed reports of the mushroom spirits and the hats they wear, and they like chocolate and things like that. And I definitely encourage people to explore those sorts of work. That body of work is out there, right? If people want to explore it. So the interesting thing is that sometimes these entities are fierce and sometimes they're gentle, and they show us maybe where we've been going wrong for the past 30 years or however long it's been, right? Because we all know, have you ever noticed that you make the same mistake over and over again?
It's called a pattern, and I've got quite a few of them.
Yeah, sure,
absolutely.
Man. I hope you stop one day.
Me too. I hope I can do a little pattern interrupt on some of these.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things I've found is that a lot of people, the people who seem to report that the mushrooms were mean to them, are the people who seem to have had strong histories of being criticized.
Okay, so they're pulling maybe from a reservoir of past criticism.
Right. So people who have been criticized for being who they are, doing what they do, perhaps family of origin, perhaps society, who knows? And it's just, this internalized hatred starts to congeal of oh, maybe they're right, maybe I'm not good enough. And then that pattern, things seem to come up to be healed. And so the thing about that stuff is that it can be really, really painful. There can be all kinds of internalized shame and guilt and things like that. And dealing with shame takes a minute because it's really essential. It's I'm not there's something wrong with me. Right. And so, as that stuff starts to arise, It's painful. Oh, because this is the other thing, is that often the mushrooms will, and this is not necessarily different from other psychedelics or other medicines, this can happen, smoking weed, that we drop into witness consciousness and we see the thing with space. There's space between me and the thing. So it's like, oftentimes, like, let's say I think a bad thought. Darren's a jerk. And then I feel guilty. It's like, oh my God, I thought he was a jerk. Like he was actually being nice, but like I'm blaming him for stuff. I'm a bad person. Like I'm so ungrateful or whatever it is. And then it's like, so I make that little thought reference who I am as an essential nature. And so then what the mushroom does is like, wait, that's not, you're actually this luminous being of love that's connected to the center of the universe. And that's just a thought pattern that got in there somehow.
Might not even be yours. I mean, who knows?
Yeah. What is ownership at this level? As the painful stuff comes up, we're in it for a bit, and it feels like it's attacking us and it's threatening us. And then all of a sudden, and there's this Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen Buddhist master, I believe coined the term miracle of mindfulness. That there's this miracle where all of a sudden you're like, wait, that's not me. That's a thought pattern. I can actually just let that go. That doesn't refer to who I am at all. It's just like a thing. It's like, oh, that's just
a tool to have.
And again, it brings us back to grace.
Yeah.
But what do they say? They say, grace is almost like an accident, but practice makes us accident prone.
So it sounds like one of the experiences of, the mushroom psychedelic experience is it can bring you mindfulness to these shadows of your own consciousness, or maybe they're elves, but shadows of your own consciousness where you're seeing mistakes, you're seeing things that you've made a core part of your identity, criticisms and things, and then maybe they're bringing them up so you can see them and realize that I can just let go of this.
Yes. So we might want to say that the mushrooms help us tune into a place of love, because in my tradition, that's an essential part of who we are, right? Just like at the core, like underneath all this other stuff we're talking about, like there's love there.
Right.
It's just as, like, this is wood, this table, like there's no amount of this table I could cut away and there wouldn't still be wood.
Right.
So there's no part of you that is not at its core love. And there's this other phrase, while we're just batting around bumper sticker phrases, at the first Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, at Alex Gray's Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, when it was in New York City, there was a painting over one of the archways that said, "Love brings up everything unlike itself for the process of healing, for the purpose of healing." And so this power of love wants you to be free, you would think, right? It wants you to be happy because that makes sense logically. And so it's like, well, you should probably like get rid of that then.
Let everything else kind of get out of the way and reveal that nature. And now when you're helping people to process a mushroom experience, is that one of the tools you use? Is to kind of remind people to hold on to that core part of themselves that is just love? Are there other kind of words of wisdom, both for people listening and my own curiosity, when someone's experiencing a mushroom psychedelic journey, are there core tenets like that can help guide the journey?
Sure, of course. Granted, I do most of my work with people before and after. So it's like, how do you set somebody up so that they have that almost somatic anchor, right? So some of the things that we do is, we talk about like who they are, who they want to be. One of the really interesting things about our world, right? And so, we're talking about things like external criticism being internalized, is that we live in a world that's got problems and is not designed for your enlightenment.
Right. That doesn't seem like the driving goal of society.
Right. We don't live in an enlightenment culture.
Right.
Right. And I've heard Robert Thurman, you can look him up. He's like a very well-respected Buddhist teacher. I think he's like one of the Dalai Lama's best friends. I mean, everybody needs friends.
Well, and I think everyone's kind of the Dalai Lama's friend. He seems like a nice guy. But yeah, that means a lot, Robert Thurman.
But Bob's the guy he calls.
Yeah.
So, he was talking about like Tibet as an enlightenment culture. That for a while it was kind of this tribal warlord kind of thing. And then kind of Buddhism took hold and they really took it to heart. and they really worked to make an Enlightenment culture, something that was designed to promote wisdom and compassion.
That sounds like the culture I want to be part of.
Totally, let's make that.
Let's
starting now.
Right now. Go.
So people don't even feel comfortable dreaming positive futures for themselves.
Wow. A lot of negative mental images of the future, a lot of dystopian mindset going around, definitely.
And so, talking to people about what they want for the future, I even hear things framed in the negative. I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be confused. I don't want to be upset anymore. So learning to, that's one of my first games with people is let's just flip that into the positive.
I want to be happy
Yeah. Clear. I want to have clarity and confidence and things like that. And it can be a hurdle and it can be emotional, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so doing that sort of stuff and then working with people to kind of keep it simple and sort of adding feeling tones. What does clarity feel like?
Yeah.
Maybe all our listeners at home can just think about something that for sure. Just go into the part of you that is clear about something. It's nighttime, it's daytime. Start small. But everybody has a certain level of clarity, something. And then what is it like to rest in that experience of knowing?
Right.
And being clear about what is. And then just kind of let that take root in your nervous system.
I see what you're saying is it being kind of an anchored somatic process to put people in the right place. And then it's right in the name, integration, because I think a lot of folks have heard of, and this, I think what you're describing is a little more specific than just general set and setting, but it is kind of that mindset component.
Mindset's important.
Yeah.
People are really sometimes good and ready about their setting.
Right.
And they're I went to Love of Ganesha on Haight Street and I bought a couple of crystals and I bought some incense and a tapestry. And it's perfect. I mean, that store's got great stuff. I love it in there.
Right.
They usually have iced tea for you. They're really sweet.
And so you're in there, you get all those good vibes, you bring back your stuff, you set up your crystal grid. Your setting is the highest vibrational energy field you can imagine.
You still got to deal with your mind.
Because you're in there too.
Yeah. So it's how do we create a mind temple? And these are the practices. These practices create a mind temple, or, sometimes they call it maybe a heart cave.
I like that. You probably need both. Probably need head and heart to be ideally connected for the best experience.
Yeah, I mean, you want some space to move around. It's take up all the real estate you want.
And then how does integration come into play? Because that part, the preparation, I think most folks are more familiar with. That integration piece seems to be really important, and it seems to be kind of a more recent acknowledgement from the psychedelic community, people who use psychedelics, is the need to effectively integrate that experience. So maybe walk us through what that looks like.
I want to quote Shane Moss, who's one of the speakers at the Psilocybin Summit. Perfect. Him and two other comedians are doing Mike Kaplan and Katrina Davis are talking about psychedelics comedically. And one of the things he said was, the problem with taking too many psychedelics is all of a sudden now you have to buy art supplies, right? Because people come out of it and they're I'm going to express this and I'm going to be an artist, or I've been an artist all along and I've been denying my purpose, that sort of stuff.
I've heard that it unlocks some creative channels for people.
Well, it unlocks creative channels. It also unlocks parts of you that you've repressed your whole life. So that's one of the mistakes. We were talking about psychedelics pointing out the mistakes. And one of the mistakes is sometimes, you've been living somebody else's life. And you actually deep down want to do this, or you want to do that, or you want to do the other thing. Now, the thing is that underneath a lot of that chat, so some of that chatter might be right or wrong, but underneath it is an urge that's probably right on the money. So we trust desires and urges, right? And needs and feelings and things of that nature. So like you said, a creative channel. When these things get repressed, they can come back with a vengeance and with an urgency that is maybe not sustainable.
I need the art supplies right now, all of them.
Yeah, I need to call that person and make it right. Don't do that.
Fix every problem for the past 30 years right now.
Right. It's like, oh, I need to go tell my partner that we need to be polyamorous.
Yeah, the flashes of insight, you may need to temper them a little bit, or
Well, so what I hear when I say that, when I hear something like that, is I need more connection to love and intimacy. I'm feeling like I have more love to give. I feel like I'm ready to receive more love, that sort of thing. So what often happens is like the urge or the need or the basic thing underneath it is right on, and often the behaviors are maladaptive because we don't know any better.
We don't know how to interpret it, yeah.
Because we haven't been trained in how to love and be intimate, because that's not what our culture's about.
No, it goes to the first association, which is I need more sexual partners.
Yeah. You just happen to have been looking at a photography book yesterday. You're like, I'm a photographer. Whereas if you were looking at like a book about pastels, it would be pastels. You don't know.
Right.
How do we honor the roots of the desire without blowing out our lifestyle, without like ruining our life for like the people? Maybe people depend on us. Maybe we have like a kids,
Yeah.
And so just bumming off to Peru isn't the thing, but you need a simpler life with deeper connection to nature. I get it. Go hiking more.
The perfect word is integration. You're better integrating, understanding the urge that you're feeling after this like heart opening, mind opening experience, kind of blows everything wide open. And then what's coming through, understanding and integrating that more sustainably.
And so, if Tam Integration had like a shield, like a college or something, like it was like Latin under it.
Crest,
like,
yeah.
So, crest, good. Sustainability would be one of the Latin words.
Do tools like meditation factor into this? Understanding that urge and processing it? Or what are some of the tools that you use to help people kind of better work with these urges in a more sustainable way?
Well, the nice thing about meditation is that it does give you more space to parse things apart. And that is a big thing. And, it's person to person, and it might be rituals. I've helped people set up personal rituals, sometimes around grief or loss or manifestation or things like that. Then those might look different. I'm hesitant to give examples because they're personal.
Right.
People often have a sense of kind of what they want and need to do. And then we work together also just to kind of find how to make them right sized. Because like I said, it's like we're not going off to go build a hut in Peru. We're going to like make a point to walk in the park near our house and maybe play guitar under the tree and maybe plan a trip in nature for the fall. We're going to go camping.
Right.
And see how that suits you. And if it does end up that you end up in the woods, disconnected from all of modern technology, then so be it. But let's do it in a way that's not going to pull the rug out from under your family.
You don't need to obliterate the identity you've created so far necessarily.
And some, and I often am, and I wish I had $1 for everybody who doesn't listen to me.
I was going to say, you may have to do these stick, or do you have to constantly check in with people? And I was wondering about, how these integration courses work.
Well, I'm not like a tough love guy, really. Like every once in a while, like a little bit of it'll come up in like sharpness of my voice, but it's like people are grown-ups. I work with grown-ups, I'm not working with like bad children. I'm working with grown-ups who are usually fairly successful. Also, I'm working with grown-ups who are fairly successful, who also happen to be manifestations of the divine. And so I treat people like that, and I trust that people are going to find their ways, and I accept them as they are. If we work on what's going on inside and look at it in the light, they're more likely to do the stuff that they want to do anyway. Like, I don't want to be like the last line of accountability.
Right.
It's not fun for me. It's not a fun relationship. But one of the things that I recommend to everybody generally is like some sort of physical practice that is mindful, and that might be dance or yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong or something that Feldenkrais.
Right.
Because one of the things that we find, we were talking about those mental patterns, is that they're in the body too.
Yes.
These various kinds of like flinches or tightnesses or aggressions, happen in the tissues sometimes before they happen in the rational mind. Because the biological organism is struggling to survive.
Right.
It's always interesting. I met a guy, I didn't realize until much later that he did a lot of psychedelic work. But I was doing like some yoga with his wife. I was doing like private yoga and with his wife. And he came in like after one of our sessions. I'd never met him before. And sometimes husbands are weird with me. Like territorial, or they're scoping me out or checking me. It's like there's like an aggression sort of like power dynamic, that I could do without, but it happens.
Yeah.
And this guy came in, so happy to meet you, heard great things, just like love. Like this guy was just like ready to just like love me and like be family, and ended up working with him too a bit. And still, we, had no idea that like, oh yeah, that guy has done like a lot of like inner work.
That might explain it. That might explain the greeting you with love instead of sword out.
Right.
What I'm really struck by is everything you're describing are like amazing practices for people to integrate into their life, even without psychedelics.
Oh, mind-blowing. Shocker.
I was ready for like because it's psychedelics, you actually stand on your head and chant in Sanskrit. It's like, no. These are practices that are simple that everyone could apply without psychedelics.
There was one time when there's a Maharaji story that Krishna Das tells that I love.
Beautiful.
All of the Americans were trying to figure out, they were like, Maharaji, tell us how to be enlightened. Tell us the answer to everything. Maharaji said, oh, that's easy. He was like, I'll tell you. And they all were like excited because they thought they were going to get like the recipe.
Right.
And he says, what you want to do is you want to meditate like Christ. And they were like, what is that? Well, how did he do it? What did he do? And Maharaji closed his eyes and a nearly visible light started to emanate from him. And it just like filled the room with like these intense just vibrations. And it was like shocked everybody. And then like a few tears streamed down Maharaji's cheek. And he said, he lost himself in love.
Wow.
And they were like, oh, anything,
how do I do that?
Anything, but, if he had said, stand on your head for, this or chant that thing, it would have been one thing, but lose myself in love?
Our culture didn't teach us that.
Yeah.
That's funny because you have situations with people like that do have a palpable effect. Whether or not you believe in energy, there are people where you enter a room and they just have an effect. There's a presence there.
Well, like you.
Well, like you too. Even in the Zoom room.
Yeah.
Even in the Zoom room, I'm feeling the vibrations coming off Daniel, and it's like raising my own vibration. I hope I can keep it there. But just getting to like the bigger psychedelic renaissance we're going through, because this has all been awesome. And my question is, how do we scale up the changes, the practice that you're doing, the changes that you're able to make in people's lives by helping them integrate psychedelics? I mean, how does this extrapolate to a bigger society that is being pushed towards enlightenment? Or do you think, psychedelics, that's the inevitable outcome? I'm kind of ascribing that to a psychedelic culture. Like, yes, the psychedelic renaissance, inevitably we will have a culture based around enlightenment. Does that get us there? And then do you think that's happening?
The enlightenment culture includes psychedelics, not the other way around.
Right. Okay. So enlightenment culture is the goal. Psychedelics are one part of that.
Is it happening? I mean, I hope so. I mean, and that's the segue into the Psilocybin Summit.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that the mushrooms say, the slime mold, right? Mm-hmm. You've heard Paul Stamets, who's also a speaker at the Psilocybin Summit. He talks about how slime mold expand, it reaches outwards to like do its slime mold thing. And so if we think about, wanting to kind of spread wisdom and compassion in a way that is irresistible, that's what the message is that we get. It's like, just try and spread this as much as you can. So that's the thing, is like, what is the appropriate activity that manifest that urge, right? Spread love.
Right.
Is vague, and I can just do that. I can just sit. Me and you can sit outside Good Earth and just like vibe it at each other, and it has been done, I'm sure, and that affects that small area. And it's like, okay, well, how do we do it more? And then you have to sort of figure out the tools that will enable you to do it more. So, I rented that room across the street from Good Earth, and we had integration circles there, and that's cool because you can get like to 20 people a month. That's cool. But then fortunately we started the Psilocybin Summit before the pandemic because I wanted to be able to reach more people.
Yeah.
With like the coolest stuff I could think of, with the coolest presenters that maybe people aren't seeing otherwise, because the most psychedelic conferences kind of focus around science, policy, and now investment and venture capital.
I was wondering how we achieve this Enlightenment culture, and then is this influence of the VC and the desire for investment and entrepreneurship, is that detracting from that at all?
I mean, it's doing something. It is a cause. It will have effects. I can't worry about that too. I'm a in the Yoga Sutras it says if you want to have like a peaceful, sweet mind, support the things you think are good. Supporting the things that you think are good is much more important than rallying against the things that you think are wicked or bad.
God, that's come up so many times in my life. Yeah, that's beautiful.
They call it chitta prasadanam, is the sweet mind, the mind full of kindness. So I'm not even calling venture capitalism wicked necessarily, although capitalism itself, I would call capitalism itself fairly wicked. It's got its pros and cons, to say that.
So you've tapped into your kind, loving mind to focus instead on people who are channeling what you want more of.
Yeah, and sticking them in front of a camera, in front of as many people as I can convince to watch.
Yeah.
And then smooshing them all together, creating this whole, because someone will come to see one person. I've got the Post-it notes on the wall with the schedule. And some people will come to see one person, and one person will come to see the other, and you stick them all together and hopefully you get three. There's a synergy,
Right.
One of the best compliments that I got was somebody said, I looked at your lineup and I didn't know who half those people were, or more. I didn't know any of those people were. And then I started Googling them and I was like, oh, cool.
Right. If you can give a platform to people who folks haven't been exposed to.
And then what's super kind really is, and kind of a validation, you have like Paul Stamets or Dennis McKenna, who of course love to share their own stories, but I have a sense that they are wanting to support, not really me necessarily, who am I, but they're wanting to support these other people who have so much to offer that people haven't heard of.
Right.
And getting this wide variety of strange and wonderful presentations in front of a lot of people.
And it hints at the fact that this is a widespread movement. I mean, this isn't just, something happening where we are in Marin County, or certain areas of the Pacific Northwest or California. I mean, this is everywhere. I was watching a lot of clips coming from the Detroit Psychedelic Conference. I mean, this movement is really widespread. And I think the diversity of people you're having from different places, different walks of life speaks to that. Talk a little bit about like how vast is this community? What kind of, I called it the psychedelic renaissance, but really how big a movement is this? And, is it even limited to the US?
Well, of course, it's not limited. I mean, people are taking psychedelics and oftentimes they're mushrooms on every continent. I mean, and I have speakers from 4 or 5, I have speakers from several continents. Australia is represented, Europe is represented. I don't know, we don't have South America this year. We do have Central America, Caribbean islands. Got a wonderful woman from Trinidad and Tobago. Her and her husband grow mushrooms in Trinidad and Tobago, but edibles as well. People love this. People all over the world are, trying to get healed.
Yeah.
I'd really, if anybody in the sound of my voice wants to fund an expedition to Mongolia to try and find a mushroom shaman in Mongolia, I'd really like to have them be a part of the summit next year. They've been hard for me to track down. I talked to somebody I know who is very much in the shamanic world in Asia, and I asked him to put me in touch with the mushroom shamans of Mongolia, and he assured me that there weren't any, and that they just used drumming and dancing to put themselves into altered states. So either he's protecting somebody and doesn't want the information to get out, or he's protecting his narrative, or he just doesn't know. Either way, I think we should go look.
I think we should get to the bottom of that one. Well, and I guess, how did you pick the folks that you did for the conference? I mean, what was that process like for you?
I like them.
It's a great starting point.
I like most of them.
Oh man, I'd hope all of them.
Well, I like all of them, but I'm aware that, this community is a strange bunch. It's an extreme subculture. People do extreme things.
Yeah.
They have extreme personalities. And so I've actually gotten complaints from people being like, you have so-and-so, they're so strange. And I was like, I know. Do you know what they're going to do at their talk? Me neither.
Yeah.
So, it's like, what is his name? Terrence, right? Terrence McKenna talks a lot about novelty.
Yes.
Right? Tim Leary and Robert Anton Wilson talk a lot about novelty. And are you a neophile or a neophobe?
Right.
I'm a neophile. I like new and strange and weird and curious. So there are like beautiful, wondrous, weird people who have curious things to say that don't often get said.
How does that culture that is so extreme, the people in this subculture right now are extreme personalities, powerful personalities. How does that then suffuse out to a greater culture? I mean, is it going to take in, the most extreme personalities out there, or how does this, and I know that's a huge question that I'm like putting on your shoulders, but how do you see this suffusing out from maybe a really extreme, powerful subculture into a greater influence on the mainstream?
Well, as we've seen, we've talked about kind of VC culture and therapeutic culture,
right?
Creating psychedelic therapies, is that more and more what we're running into is creating environments that feel safe and comfortable for more and more people. And these practices of preparation, integration, creating safe set and setting, and also sharing the science and the research around the real measurable benefits are making it more acceptable to more people.
Right.
Which is fine. It's different now when it was just kind of this self-selected crew of intrepid travelers.
You get the most maverick. Yeah.
Yeah, who would just be like, oh, I'll see you tomorrow kind of attitude, let's see what happens. Now there's people who are wanting to be more cautious, and that's fine. It's not the counterculture, the psychedelic hippie counterculture or whatever doesn't have the market cornered on these things.
Right.
I mean, nor does necessarily indigenous cultures, although it's my deep desire that their practices and their lifestyles are cared for, protected, and that when they are worked with by American or Western entrepreneurs, that there's a healthy and sacred reciprocity. But the cat's out of the bag, and there are fortunately some like really amazing people working on these problems. Like there are some in the Bay Area, there are very conscious therapists and service providers who are trying to really provide care for people who need it. There is, for example, Sage Institute in Oakland/Berkeley is doing sliding scale care and always doing fundraisers to work to offer, because they're working a lot with ketamine because it's legal.
Yeah.
You can do that. They're trying to get that in the hands of like marginalized populations, people who wouldn't necessarily, people who can't just pay their way to Peru or Amsterdam or something.
And who have plenty of pain to bring up and process and everything else.
So there are trustworthy people doing wonderful things.
Well, and it sounds like that approachability through a therapeutic space, which makes people feel the most comfortable, is one of the ways you turn it from counterculture to mainstream culture. And just when you were talking about the fact that these are ingested worldwide, obviously there are examples throughout history. I keep thinking of Terence McKenna in the book Food of the Gods, that we have no choice as humanity. A relationship, an intimate relationship with psychedelics, widespread across human culture, is inevitable.
Yes, I like to think that it's inevitable.
It definitely feels that way. The more I talk to people and the more I see how it's affecting people's lives and how much people resonate with it. And from someone who's done the work you've done, do you have any advice for folks who want this kind of the kind of space that you hold, an integration circle or some kind of venue, safe space or venue for these kind of conversations, integrating for these kind of experiences? Do you have any advice for people who want to see this kind of thing set up, in their town or their local area?
Right. Well, I mean, these days, my integration circles are online. That's the way things work these days.
Yeah,
right.
Virtual,
There's no gathering. So every Wednesday, we'll probably take a couple of weeks off around the summit. Every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific time, we have a circle. Sometimes they're bigger, sometimes they're smaller. There's links where you can donate. Nobody's ever overtly asked for money. That's kind of important to me. I mean, they can, of course, also, if they want to start one in their own town, and it's not rocket science, but if you go to my website, I made an online course about how to start an integration circle.
Oh, fantastic.
I think I put it on quarantine sale. I think it's $20. And of course, you can set up privates with me, right? I do client work. People should totally call me and work with me on a regular basis. So those are kind of the three things. And I'm not the only one having integration circles. If you go onto Facebook or Meetup, you'll find them. They're around. You can type integration into the search bars and they'll come up.
So it's getting out there more and more, even even an internet search could find you something locally. Yes.
And then, of course, come to the Psilocybin Summit and hang out for 40 hours with some of the brightest minds in the quote unquote business. In the realm.
Yeah, exactly. We can't use business or industry. There's got to be another term we can throw in there.
I would just suggest that you be on the lookout for, if you go to a psychedelic website and they say that something like Visionary Integration Corporation is a wellness brand. Don't hang out with anybody who calls their organization a brand.
Right.
Please.
I think inevitably we're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah.
It won't be the domain of just certain groups, and it won't even be the domain of the people who are trying to bring it through with the most integrity. It'll be the domain of capitalism before too long, unless we can spread this information fast enough and deconstruct capitalism before they can take it over.
Right.
I guess you have another unique viewpoint, and this is something I'm always curious about, and I've heard different stories around this, but you're a father. You got a little one. What is that like to and I don't know if you've had psychedelic experiences since you've had a child, but in this realm of people who work with psychedelics and they are parents, are there any special considerations there in terms of doing it responsibly? And are there benefits people can get from taking these experiences with proper preparation and integration that can make them better parents?
So I haven't had any time for that. There's no time for that. And, I'm a responsible parent, and a safe parent. I did a certain amount of, and this is interesting, there's something called the Kriya Institute where they do, and this is a tangential to mushrooms. The Kriya Institute is run by a very brilliant woman named Dr. Raquel Bennett, and it's Ketamine Research Institute, basically. And she invited me to do a series of ketamine treatments and a training in how ketamine works and how to work with people on ketamine and things like that. So I ended up getting to do a series of high-dose ketamine treatments leading up to the birth of my child.
Wow.
And that was pretty profound as far as stepping into that role, finding the place in me where my commitment to the process existed.
Yeah.
Like how committed am I to being an amazing father? How committed am I to raising this child to the best of my ability and doing what needs to be done to embody the best of what he needs and those sorts of things, and deconstructing fears, insecurities, perceived inadequacies. If you're going into a thing, it's sometimes good to do some work around that thing.
Prepare for a monumental, life-changing event.
Mm-hmm.
with some responsible psychedelic practice potentially.
Yeah, and see what's there. And I have no doubt that it helped.
Yeah.
There are going to be some women at the conference who recommend microdosing while pregnant, psilocybin while pregnant, to bring, enlightened babies into the planet. And we did not do that, but that's a thing.
Okay.
That people are doing and feel really, really good and strongly about.
I've also heard folks, I think it was in England, a group of mothers started microdosing and found it easier with young children, not the young children microdosing, of course, but the mothers were, and they were felt like they were able to connect with their children more. They were able to be more present for play and that kind of thing. So
that wouldn't surprise me.
It's an interesting dynamic. Not that they seem antithetical, but I would think that, for a lot of people, any kind of exploration of psychedelics kind of stops when you have children and you take on that new role. So I was curious to hear if there's still a place for it.
To what extent, I wonder, one of the things I'm just wondering now, because obviously like the baby was not in my body.
I don't think
right?
so. Yeah.
But so well, follow me with this, because when you do large doses of ketamine, neither are you. So right. I also was not in my body. And to like what extent was there an energetic connection between us while I was in those astral realms? And did that foster did that help nurture our relationship before he was born, because we got to hang out in ketamine-inspired astral realms?
I love that idea that you can commune with the baby spirit before it even comes in on the astral realms through psychedelic experience. Well, I
had a really weird DMT trip once where I smoked the DMT, and the like the machine elves were like showing me, were like showing me this baby sort of larva thing, and they were like, "Hey, look at this! Isn't this cool? This is like new. This is a new one. Don't you like it? That's our new one." And I was like, "Yeah, that's really cool." And they were like, "Okay, it's been 5 minutes. Bye." And later that day, I went to my friend across the street, his house, and he had a new puppy.
Wow.
And the new puppy looked just like
the larva.
The larva. I was like, oh, that's what they were showing me.
That's what's so interesting. Speaking with different psychonauts about this, it's like the psychedelics can show you, they lower, whatever the actual scientific theory is, gate theory or whatever the case is, that lowers your brain's inhibitory physical barriers that let you have the consciousness that we all experience, that when those gates are lowered through a psychedelic experience, you're seeing what's actually happening.
The only problem is it's like Mothman prophecies. Have you seen that movie?
Not sure I'm familiar, no.
It's spooky, but apparently, if I remember correctly, this guy keeps getting messages from like the Mothman or something, and the Mothman gives him like little bits of information about the future.
Yeah.
Like, he'll be like 4:31 at 10:45. And then like he'll be looking at the news and like that plane crashed at that time. Little bits of that. And so the guy starts to try to figure out what the stuff means to try and avert disasters, but he always interprets it wrong.
So maybe you can't always interpret the insights that you're getting right away.
Almost never.
Yeah. It's not something actionable. It's not like go out and fix the world using this information now.
Yeah. And so, this creature was kind of on one level kind of torturing him. It's like the Yoga Sutras, again, not to harp on the Yoga Sutras, except I want to, is they talk about how like magic powers are available and are also not what it's about.
Wow.
Don't be distracted by magic powers. Your job is to cultivate love, wisdom, consciousness.
Sounds like good advice for the psychedelic experience in general. And one of my last big questions, as we're talking about like the bigger movement of psychedelia right now, obviously we're in the Bay Area. There's that landmark decision in Oakland to decriminalize certain substances, including psilocybin. Do you have any viewpoint or any insights on like decriminalization versus legalization and how that helps this movement of responsible psychedelic use changing society for the better? Where do those things fit in?
Well, it's important that people understand the distinction between decriminalization and legalization. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's legal. It means that it's a very, very low priority to the local police. So that's the city of Oakland has decriminalized. Alameda County has not, right? So county sheriffs, state police has not. The federal government certainly has not.
Right.
You've got a city who kind of doesn't care if you grow your own mushrooms or eat them on your own time. So that is, in a lot of ways, a gesture, because I don't believe a lot of people were being arrested for it anyway. What is starting to happen now is that the Decrim Nature people in Oakland are now working on something called OCHI, OCHI, which is I believe it's the Oakland Community Healers Initiative. One of the really neat things about it is that it's really community based. A lot of the psychedelic community is sort of like middle class white guys, and they're kind of spent a lot of time, picture Grateful Dead show.
Yeah, I mean, and picture us talking right now.
Yeah, us, right? So it's mostly us. And what we're then doing is creating spaces that are fun and enjoyable and useful for us.
Right.
And so sometimes the people that we're not super connected with or in community with or comfortable with, perhaps, get left out. Maybe they're not comfortable with us either. And again, when we're talking about like the work that Sage is doing, for example, people with like the trauma of institutionalized racism, misogyny, and the people who are really taking the brunt of the capitalist system, classism and stuff like that, who might need this the most, are being left out by however well-intentioned, middle-aged, middle-class white guys. So the OCHI initiative is mostly people of color from Oakland who are working to put together this Oakland Community Healers Initiative, which will then sort of put forward a means by which community people can be sort of quote unquote certified as healers and be able to hold circles and create environments and access for the people of their community, which is pretty rad.
Yeah, that's kind of what you hope would happen.
Yeah, because at first it just said, okay, you can have them and you can eat them.
Right. And
now it's sort of like, this is kind of what it looks like. Now you can maybe do it together with your community under the auspices of a community leader.
So this, you're saying, has been sanctioned basically by the city of Oakland?
I'm saying that they're working on it.
Okay, they're working on getting it sanctioned, but yeah, that would be a great next step. And is there one better than the other? I mean, not to lose ourselves too much in that argument, but that whole legalization versus decriminalization, is it all just moving the right direction?
I don't have a compass.
What's the right direction? I just mean, is it all moving toward that goal of responsible psychedelic use that improves our society in a way where we become more of an Enlightenment culture and ideally lose a lot of the toxic attributes of our current society that a lot of people are cognizant of? Do they both kind of trend us in that direction? Is there any downside to either legalization or decriminalization, or our efforts in that direction just should be supported? And like I said, I know there could be a really nuanced argument. That's part of the reason I'm asking, is because I'm not in. There
are some really nuanced arguments. For the most part, decrim's a cool model, right? And it's definitely a cool model when it comes to plant medicines. When you start adding more complicated chemicals into the mix, because there's no reason why people shouldn't be able to have MDMA or whatever else they want, but like MDMA can be cut with things. It's rarely what you think it is. Like, so there's like just decrimming something like that is less safe.
Okay.
Right? Like having a regulated recreational MDMA would be cool.
Would probably be the right route. I see what you're saying there, yeah.
And so then the thing is like, again, like who's being harmed by the drug war the most, right? You've probably seen memes about, okay, we have pot stores that look like the Apple store. Yeah, yeah. Again, like well-to-do people are making bank on. The rich are getting richer, and there's still a disproportionate amount of people of color rotting in prison for minor nonviolent drug offenses.
Horrible. Yeah.
Right? And so while things like the legalization efforts in Oregon, for example, it's kind of groundbreaking legislation that, is probably definitely a net positive, it doesn't take into account the fact that, like, oh, are we still, like, if we're in Oregon and you give me some mushrooms, like, we both go to jail, or vice versa, right? So it's it's going to be, to what extent are we even dealing with real mushrooms, or are we dealing with psilocybin that was grown with yeast in a lab, right? And so what's the difference between mushrooms and psilocybin, right? So we have to, like, look into that. And then who's producing it?
Yep.
And what is their process like, and how do they treat their employees?
Yeah.
Right. So so who's making medical grade psilocybin, and what are they all about, and what are they connected to? And why is it that I can have that under the guidance of a therapist, but I can't have a shoebox in my closet where I grow mushrooms for $20? I have to, like, pay thousands of dollars for insurance a year to get maybe access to, like, this medical grade psilocybin.
This vial of psilocybin. Well, and as far as I know, there isn't any research being done with just psilocybin containing mushroom fruit bodies in this country. I know in Mexico that's actually happening. But it's interesting to see the direction that takes us.
I want to meet that guy, by the way. Introduce me to those people, please.
Well, and actually, it was a guest I had on the show, Jamie Bonfilio, episode 12, if I'm remembering right, where she's funding some of that research on certain strains in a lab in Mexico. And that's kind of what I was getting at, that question, like, decriminalization, legalization, what kind of pathways do they open up? How will they transform the psychedelic landscape? Because it seems like, we are kind of moving away from the full plant medicine and moving more towards some kind of extract. I'm kind of a believer that, there are other things in the fruit bodies or the actual material of the fungus or the plant, other things that are cofactors to the whole experience, that are adding or stabilizing or doing something to the actual psychedelic experience rather than just the concentrated raw ingredient. So I was wondering your opinion on that, and you had a pretty nuanced, well-informed answer, as I hoped you would. Getting back to the conference, obviously that's what we're here to promote, here to get people super excited about. Just briefly, what is the structure of the conference, and where can people go to get tickets and be involved?
psilocybinsummit.com.
That's easy.
And so the thing is, if you type in psilocybinsummit.com/hi there for the special for the Mushroom Hour listeners, you'll get 10% off.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'll probably be sharing that code then, it sounds like, on social and all that good stuff.
And I made you a little graphic.
I was kind of humbled and impressed that you had a little graphic, and the picture of me I thought was funny too.
Right. I mean, that was, well, when we added you as the moderator, that is the one that my assistant found and chose.
Fantastic. And then who will I be moderating?
You're going to be moderating the illustrious James McConchie, who I believe you've also had as a guest on your show.
I have you as one of the very first people I interviewed. Terrific. So people can go to psilocybinsummit.com. They can get tickets. /hi there. They can get discounted tickets. And then how long is the event? How long each day does it run? Can people just tune in anytime? Or
they are long days. Well, we have sort of, you can get live tickets, or you can get forever access tickets, or you can watch the stuff at your own pace.
Oh, fantastic.
Because, like, on Saturday and Sunday, for example, Saturday is our longest day. We start at 6:30 in the morning.
Wow. Okay. In the office early.
We go until the talks go until 7. And then there's a musical guest at 7:30.
Oh, right.
So Friday and Saturday we have musical guests.
Nice.
Yeah, on Friday night we have the Hanuman Project, and these are some really nice. You know them?
I don't know them, but I love Hanuman as a character.
Yeah, so. And they're devotees, and they play medicine music. Like they sometimes sit in. They live in Bali, and they sometimes sit in on ceremonies, and they're also kirtan musicians, and so. They just sort of really straddle the worlds in a wonderful way. Their vibe is amazing. And I really, really like them. I'm really glad they agreed to do this. And then on Saturday night is Pedro Vidar. Pedro is a Mexican medicine musician who grew up in the Mazatec. He grew up in Oaxaca, eating mushrooms and like communing with the spirit of the mountain and the spirit of thunder. It's like a really long time practitioner, deep soul, sweet being, also a father, for whatever that's worth.
I think it says a lot about a person. I mean, the lineup, I do encourage people to check it out. Obviously, I encourage people to get tickets. Even if, like myself, you're not some veteran psychonaut, it's just incredibly interesting material. You end up with insights that are relevant whether or not you're into psychedelics. And I think that's what's so amazing about psychedelic culture is it's venturing into the vast unknown kind of inner space, or maybe it's another plane in outer space, and bringing back insights we can all use. So I definitely encourage people to go get tickets and experience the event. And I love the idea that there's tickets to go at your own pace, because I think for people that can't do the 6:30 to 7 o'clock marathon, which I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that do, it's nice to have all of these amazing speakers saved
and
for posterity.
Thursday is free, and also last year's Thursday talks are up on our YouTube page.
Terrific.
And the whole summit, the summit from last year is available for purchase on the website too. I mean, it's old news by now, but it's just brilliant stuff.
Yeah, it's just brilliant material to be able to go back and reference. I mean, for you, do you have any thoughts about the future, what you kind of want your practice to be, any other things on the horizon, maybe even personally for you?
Well, I'm hoping when this is done, I can do some writing. I'm constantly working on a book. I don't really know how to write a book, but I'm working on one. I'm looking forward to, I spend my time not working on stuff, like on the floor with the baby.
Best place to be.
And, I really just like my client work. So I'm like I would be really, really happy just to spend the rest of my life having like really deep conversations with people about the nature of mind. And
just from having our conversations, I can tell that you're doing a lot of good work and you're an absolute joy to talk to.
No, you are.
So thank you for gracing us with your presence. And I'll wrap up with 3 questions that I ask people. And I have a feeling what the answer to the first one's going to be, but you may surprise me. But what is a mushroom that you love and why?
What's a mushroom? I like shiitakes.
Of course.
I mean, I really like, there's something about even just slicing through a shiitake with a really sharp knife and the way they just kind of come apart like butter and then, saute so nicely.
Definitely one of my favorites. Delicious, super medicinal as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great choice of shiitake.
I hope that's not too plebeian or something.
Absolutely not. No, it's funny because no one said shiitake, even though it is like such a powerhouse, well-known mushroom.
Right.
No one's ever said shiitake before, so great choice.
Even pulling them out of the paper bag is such a joy.
Yeah. I know, even just as a fruit body with their little curled, if you get them before they open up all the way with the little curled edges, there's something absolutely beautiful. And of course, for anyone who's followed my channel, I end up growing a lot of shiitake because we get them to Far West Fungi. There's amazing people down in Santa Cruz. And you can tell the shiitake mycelium blocks from all the other ones because they're the only brown mycelium.
Right.
So you can pick out your brown blocks and know that you're going to get delicious shiitake. And I think last year we took back like 300 blocks. So we were just...
I remember that.
Inundated in our larder there.
And they're so wholesome. There's something about like shiitake and like a locally made tofu.
Oh man, shiitake, just throwing dried shiitake into any kind of miso or soup.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing better. Bigger, broader question. What is a relationship with kingdom fungi, with mushrooms? What has that given to you? And that could be new perspectives, new fascination with science, a new level of spirituality. What has that relationship given to you?
Well, right now I'm sort of, I use the word wholesome and I want to kind of stick with that. Just the kind of simple wholesomeness of relating with the earth. Yeah, I can't say more than that.
That's at their essence what they do for so many people, including myself, is they give you a much firmer connection with the earth because they are so connected throughout the earth.
And it's like, I can say more about that because things like, sometimes like LSD, it's like exciting and like electric and whereas sort of the psilocybin is, brings you back to a rooted wholesomeness, like and the joy of that kind of thing, like the joy of simplicity.
That gets at that idea too that I asked about. It's like, how does it differentiate it as a psychedelic experience, and I think that's a great description. And then what is the lasting impact that you hope to make with your body of work? And we've kind of talked about that in bits and pieces throughout, but what's the lasting impact that you hope to make with your work, both in psychedelic integration, holding events, the whole body of work?
I would like to see people value their chitta prasadanam, right? We talked about chitta prasadanam, about being like having a mind that is kind and sweet and simple, and to prioritize that over other materialistic or glamorous pursuits.
There are a few nobler causes than that, my friend. Yeah, I just thank you so much for being willing to come on the show, provide a lot of deep insight. I know we wended down some different paths, and it's because I'm always fascinated in talking with you. You got a depth of experience and a knowledge about so many different things that are exciting.
I love wending.
I love wending and winding, man. It's nothing better. We'll bookmark this conversation for here, and I'm looking forward to the Psilocybin Summit. We'll see you there.
Thank you so much. It's been a true joy. And I would just love to say one more time, hi there.